I fixed everybody else's broken pipes for more than 30 years. But when I finally pulled up my own Social Security record, I was basically starting from zero. I sat behind that desk for 28 years, and I've seen this more times than I'm comfortable admitting. Men who could rebuild an engine blindfolded. Women who kept entire restaurants running through double shifts. Roofers, welders, truck drivers, plumbers. People who spent decades solving emergencies for everybody else while their own paperwork quietly rotted underneath them. Eddie Sullivan was one of those men, 56 years old. Atlanta heat already sticking to his shirt before 7 in the morning. Divorced. Bad knees. Hands so rough the fingerprints were almost gone. Everybody around the South Side called him the Wrench, because if a pipe burst at 2 in the morning, Eddie showed up before the water finished flooding the kitchen. But that morning, he was sitting on the bumper of his old white work van staring at a laptop screen like it had insulted him personally. $147. That was the estimate staring back at him if he claimed early and kept drifting job to job the way he'd been doing. He tapped the screen 3 times with a dirty fingernail, like the number might change. Silicone still drying across his knuckles. Sweat running off the end of his nose onto the keyboard. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, just because he didn't know what else to do.
I figured if I kept working, things would work themselves out.
The socket set rattled inside the open toolbox beside him when a MARTA bus rolled past the parking lot. Eddie grabbed a stained rag off the passenger seat and wiped his face hard enough to leave gray streaks along his cheeks. On the laptop screen, whole years sat there almost empty. Zeros. Weak earnings. Years. Missing stretches where he'd taken cash jobs after the housing crash. Years after the divorce where he barely filed correctly because he was too tired to deal with it. And I'll be straight with you. This part still bothers me when I think about it, because men like Eddie are usually the first people everybody calls when something breaks. But they're the last people who admit their own situation is leaking underneath them. He kept scrolling. The fan inside the laptop wheezed like it was about to die.
Don't die on me now.
Traffic hissed nearby on wet pavement from a storm the night before. His coffee sat on the bumper turning cold while condensation dripped down the cup onto an invoice folded so many times the corners were soft as cloth. Then his phone rang. Burst pipe in Decatur. He stared at the phone. Let it buzz twice. 3 times. Ignored it. That's when he knew the panic had finally gotten bigger than the work itself. He sat there another minute staring at the phone, then reached into the cooler looking for water and realized he forgot to restock it again. He cursed under his breath. A drill bit rolled off the passenger seat onto the floor mat. Traffic kept moving around him while he just sat there.
I remember thinking, how the hell did I spend 30-something years fixing emergencies and still end up here?
Now listen. The mistake wasn't that Eddie worked too little. The mistake was that he never slowed down long enough to look at the system underneath his own life. By 8 that morning, he was parked outside a small duplex, with sweat soaking through the back of his gray t-shirt. He hauled a drain machine across wet grass, knees cracking loud enough he muttered curses under his breath. The customer kept apologizing for the mess while brown water sloshed around the laundry room floor. Eddie barely answered, because mentally he was still back at that laptop, still seeing those empty earnings years, still seeing himself at 70 trying to survive on almost nothing. I remember one man years ago, another plumber actually, sat across from me smelling like PVC glue and old coffee, hands shaking so hard he dropped his reading glasses twice. Same look Eddie had, same mixture of embarrassment and anger. That look stays with you. By lunchtime, Eddie was back inside the van between calls. Atlanta humidity fogging the inside of the windshield. He balanced the laptop on an upside-down bucket while chewing gas station peanuts for lunch. He started reading, line by line, year after year. 2008. Terrible. 2009. Worse. 2013, almost empty because he'd worked mostly side jobs after hurting his shoulder. He scratched numbers onto the back of a supply receipt with a carpenter pencil, the lead snapping once from the pressure.
That can't be right.
Then he opened another calculator, started testing what happened if he replaced some of those bad years with steady reported income. And this is where people get tripped up with Social Security. It's not only about how long you worked, it's about your highest earning years actually showing up correctly and strongly enough to matter. Eddie didn't know the formulas, didn't care about the formulas, but he understood clogged systems. That part made sense to him immediately. Weak years were clogs. Missing earnings were corrosion. He started talking to the laptop like it was an old rusted pipe under a sink.
All right, so that's where you're choking everything down.
His ex-wife Diane found him still sitting there that evening after he parked outside the duplex he rented. The van ticked softly while the engine cooled. She leaned against the passenger door, holding 2 grocery bags.
You've been sitting out here this whole time?
Eddie shrugged.
Trying to figure something out.
She climbed inside carefully around the scattered pipe fittings and paper cups, picked up one wrinkled printout from the SSA website.
Jesus, Eddie!
He hated that look. That soft, concerned look people use when they think your life's starting to slide sideways. So he got defensive, started talking louder, faster, said he'd figure it out himself, said he didn't need help, said maybe he'd just work forever. Diane let him talk, then quietly moved a rusted wrench off the laptop keyboard and folded one of the crumpled earnings printouts flat with both hands.
You're tired!
That hit him harder than the numbers did, because he was tired. Tired in the bones. The kind that sleep doesn't fix. That night he carried the laptop and paperwork inside to the kitchen table. Small apartment. Weak overhead light buzzing faintly. Coffee stains on old mail. Tool bag dumped beside the chair. This became the ritual after that. Every morning before sunrise, Eddie sat there with coffee, tools, grease on his hands, and that Social Security record open in front of him, like a mechanic tearing apart an engine one bolt at a time. The people who finally fix these situations usually stop treating the problem like shame and start treating it like work. That's exactly what Eddie did.
I stopped asking why it happened. I started asking what I could still fix.
Over the next few weeks, he got methodical, painfully methodical. He started taking steadier commercial maintenance contracts instead of random cash calls. Less quick money under the table, more documented income. He hated it at first. The jobs were boring. Apartment complexes, grocery stores, restaurant chains, no adrenaline, no emergency heroics, just steady invoices, steady reporting, steady replacement years. Every dawn he sat at that kitchen table with the laptop open beside a chipped coffee mug and compared numbers before heading out to work. Sometimes the internet cut out halfway through loading the SSA page. Sometimes his hands cramped so badly he dropped the pen. One morning he realized he'd misread an earnings line entirely and spent 20 minutes staring at the wrong year. He slammed the notebook shut so hard the spoon jumped out of the coffee cup. Then he laughed again. Same nervous laugh from the van.
Diane heard it from the bedroom.
You okay? No, but I'm working on it.
I wish I could tell you these stories always turn around fast. They don't. Some people run out of time. Some run out of health. Some just can't force themselves to look at the numbers long enough. Eddie almost quit halfway through the process himself, especially after one brutal August afternoon when he crawled out from under a restaurant sink soaked in sweat and realized his lower back had started trembling every time he stood up. That scared him. Not because of the pain, because for the first time, he could actually imagine a day he physically couldn't work anymore. That night, he sat at the kitchen table long after midnight. Atlanta thunder rumbling outside. One lamp on above the paperwork. He refreshed the benefit estimate again. The number had moved. Not huge, but enough. Enough to prove the system could still change. Enough to make him sit there staring silently at the screen while rain tapped against the windows. Once Eddie realized the leak could actually be slowed down, He became obsessed with fixing every weak year he still could before time caught him completely. Tell me something honestly. If you opened your own earnings record tonight and found holes in it, would you actually face it right away? I've seen people react to Social Security problems in all kinds of ways over the years. Some panic immediately, some go numb, and some do what Eddie Sullivan did at first. They pretend the problem can wait another few months, while their body quietly keeps score. 3 weeks after Eddie started digging through his earnings record, he was sitting at that kitchen table again before sunrise, wearing work boots and an old Braves t-shirt, stiff with dried pipe glue. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and damp cardboard from boxes stacked near the wall. His laptop froze halfway through loading the SSA site. He smacked the side of it with the flat of his hand. Nothing. Smacked it again, harder. Finally, the screen flickered back. Diane walked in, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and just stared at him.
You're gonna kill that computer. I might kill myself first.
But he kept scrolling. That was the ritual now. Every morning before work, tools on the table, coffee cooling untouched, utility bills pushed aside, fingers stained black from old pipe grease dragging across printed earnings statements. And here's the part most people miss. The emotional hit usually doesn't come from one giant mistake. It comes from realizing how many tiny decisions piled together over 20 years. Cash jobs here, late taxes there, years spent surviving instead of planning. Eddie started noticing entire seasons of his life hidden inside those earnings gaps. The divorce, the shoulder injury, months sleeping in the van after a contractor stopped paying him on time. One line on the record showed barely any reported income. During a year, he remembered working almost constantly. He leaned back in the chair slowly, joints cracking. Then he whispered something so quietly, Diane barely heard it.
I busted my ass that whole year, and it barely exists.
He rubbed both hands over his face and sat there, breathing through his nose hard, not crying. Eddie wasn't really a crying man. He leaned back in the chair slowly, joints cracking. Then he whispered something so quietly Diane barely heard it.
I busted my ass that whole year, and it barely exists.
He rubbed both hands over his face and sat there, breathing through his nose hard, not crying. Eddie wasn't really a crying man, but shame does strange things to people when they're alone at a kitchen table before daylight. I remember seeing this exact moment happen across my desk more times than I can count. Somebody realizes the system only recognizes what actually got reported and documented. Not the sacrifices, not the exhaustion, not the missed birthdays or wrecked knees, just the numbers. That truth can hit like a brick. Later that day, Eddie was inside a cramped crawl space under a duplex replacing corroded copper lines. Mud soaking through his shirt, flashlight balanced against a beam. The younger helper beside him kept complaining about the heat. Eddie barely answered. His mind kept replaying those missing earnings years.
You all right, old man?
Eddie tightened a fitting too hard.
Just thinking about leaks.
The kid laughed. Eddie didn't, because to him it suddenly all felt connected. Pipes hidden inside walls. Problems ignored too long. Pressure building where nobody could see it. That evening, he stopped at a diner instead of heading straight home. Ordered meatloaf he barely touched, spread receipts and notebooks across the booth while truck headlights rolled past outside the window. A waitress refilled his coffee twice without asking questions. He started calculating again, slowly, painfully. What happened if he worked steady until 70? What happened if he replaced more weak years? What happened if he stopped treating every extra dollar like something temporary? The pencil moved across paper in short, angry scratches. At one point, he got frustrated and crumpled an entire page. Then, immediately smoothed it back open because he didn't want to lose the math. That detail stuck with me when he later told me the story. Because that's exactly what this process feels like for a lot of people your age. Trying to flatten out decisions that already happened years ago without tearing the paper completely. By September, Eddie had changed more than just the work. He changed habits, started documenting every invoice carefully. For a while, he still kept losing receipts anyway. One stayed in his jeans pocket and went through the wash. Another got soaked in the van during a storm. He kept getting frustrated with himself. Opened a separate account for taxes because he was tired of pretending April wouldn't come. Took fewer cash shortcuts. He even started turning down some emergency calls after midnight. That one hurt. The old Eddie took pride in being the guy who always answered, but his body was slowing down whether he liked it or not. One night, the phone rang around 1:30 in the morning. Burst water heater. Eddie stared at the screen from bed. Didn't move. The phone buzzed until voicemail picked up. He laid there, staring at the ceiling fan afterward, like he'd betrayed part of himself. Then, the next morning, he opened the laptop again at the kitchen table and checked the projected benefit estimate. Higher. Not life-changing yet, but climbing. Diane slid a plate of toast beside him and looked over his shoulder.
You smile different now?
Eddie snorted.
I ain't smiling.
You are a little.
He tried hiding it by reaching for the coffee mug. But she was right, because for the first time in years, he could actually see a version of old age that didn't end in pure panic. Still tight, still uncertain, but survivable. And I'll be honest with you, that kind of hope can make people emotional in ways they don't expect, especially practical men who spent their whole lives believing survival itself was the plan. A few weeks later, Eddie hit another wall. One of the commercial contracts dried up suddenly. Budget cuts. Gone overnight. He sat inside the van outside the property office, gripping the steering wheel, while rain hammered the windshield. Old fear came back fast. You could almost smell it inside the cab with the wet work shirts and stale coffee. He drove home in silence, went straight to the kitchen table, opened the laptop with shaking hands, started recalculating again. That's the moment Diane later told me scared her most. Not because he was yelling, not because he was falling apart, because he looked exhausted enough to finally give up. The overhead light buzzed softly while he stared at the numbers. Then he reached over, pulled a grease-stained notepad closer, and started writing out another plan instead. Different contracts, different schedule, more stable reporting, less pride, more strategy. That's when the panic slowly turned into stubbornness, the useful kind. And when a man like Eddie Sullivan becomes stubborn about fixing something, he usually doesn't stop until the wrench breaks, or the leak does. But the real turning point came the morning he finally realized exactly how much those stronger earning years could change by 70. And the number on that screen made him sit back, completely speechless. Would you keep fighting if you realized your best financial years might still be ahead of you instead of behind you? I sat behind that desk for 28 years, and every once in a while somebody would come along who reminded me that stubbornness can either ruin a person or save them. For Eddie Sullivan, it almost did both. The morning everything finally clicked for him started before daylight again. Atlanta air thick enough to feel wet. His apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional metallic clink from tools spread across the kitchen table. Same ritual. Laptop open, coffee half cold, pipe wrench sitting beside a stack of earnings printouts like it belonged there. Eddie rubbed sleep from his eyes and logged into the SSA site again while flexing stiffness out of both hands. His right thumb had started locking up lately from years of twisting fittings. He hated that. Made him feel old. The screen loaded slowly. He leaned forward, started plugging in updated estimates from the steadier contracts he'd been working. Commercial maintenance, apartment inspections, monthly service agreements. Less glamorous work, but reliable. Reported, trackable. The pencil scratched across paper again, then stopped. He blinked hard and checked the math twice, 3 times. The estimate hadn't exploded or anything, but for the first time, it was moving in the right direction consistently. Not millionaire money, not luxury, but enough to breathe. Enough that he might not spend old age panicking every month. He sat back in the chair, so suddenly it creaked loud under him. Then he covered his mouth with one rough hand and stared at the screen for a long time without talking.
I really almost let this whole thing collapse because I was too proud to slow down and look at it.
Diane walked in wearing slippers and stopped when she saw his face.
What happened?
Eddie turned the laptop toward her without saying anything. She squinted at the estimate, then looked back at him.
You did that?
He shrugged once, but his eyes had gone red around the edges.
Still gotta keep at it.
That was Eddie. Even his victories sounded cautious. He reached for the coffee cup and realized his hand was trembling slightly. Not from fear this time. Relief. The kind that sneaks up on people after they've been bracing for disaster too long. Outside, somebody started a leaf blower down the block. The sound drifted through the thin apartment windows, while Eddie kept staring at the numbers like they might disappear if he blinked wrong. And honestly, this is the part I wish more people understood before they hit 60. Most of the folks I met weren't lazy. They were exhausted. There's a difference. The sound drifted through the thin apartment windows, while Eddie kept staring at the numbers like they might disappear if he blinked wrong. And honestly, this is the part I wish more people understood before they hit 60. Most of the folks I met weren't lazy. They were exhausted. There's a difference. Eddie spent decades solving immediate problems, because immediate problems scream louder than retirement does. Burst pipes, late rent, divorce lawyers, broken transmissions, emergency calls at midnight. Most people keep putting this stuff off because nothing feels urgent yet. Then one day, it suddenly does. Over the next several months, Eddie treated his Social Security record the same way he treated old plumbing in a damaged house. Slow pressure test, one weak spot at a time. He kept the kitchen table ritual alive every morning, sometimes before dawn, sometimes after brutal 12-hour days when his knees hurt so badly, he lowered himself into the chair using both hands. One evening, I remember him describing how he spread papers across the table while thunder rolled outside. Tax records, earnings summaries, invoice books held together with rubber bands. One receipt tore almost completely down the middle when he unfolded it. He stared at it for a second and laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because it felt exactly like his life looked back then. Worn thin from being folded over too many times.
Started joining him at the table more often after that. Never pushing, never lecturing. Just sitting nearby with tea while he worked numbers. Sometimes she'd ask simple questions. What year was your shoulder surgery? Didn't that contractor stiff you around then?
Little things. But they helped him rebuild the timeline honestly instead of emotionally. That matters more than people realize, because shame distorts memory. Eddie had spent years telling himself he'd failed completely. The paperwork showed something more complicated. Bad years, yes. Missing opportunities, absolutely. But also decades of real work he could still build from. One afternoon he came home from servicing a grocery store boiler room soaked in sweat and grease, dropped heavily into the kitchen chair and opened the laptop without even taking off his boots.
Looked at him. You checking again?
Just want to make sure the leak's still slowing down.
That became his joke after a while. Every time the estimates improved, he called it slowing the leak. But underneath the humor was real fear, because Eddie knew exactly what broke older blue-collar workers. Not always one giant disaster. Sometimes just years of wear. Tiny cracks nobody notices until the whole system gives out. And I'll be straight with you. Not everybody gets the chance Eddie got. Some people wait too long. Some can't physically keep working long enough to strengthen those later years. I saw that too, plenty of times. That's why Eddie's turnaround mattered so much to him personally. Not because he became rich, because he stopped drifting. One Saturday morning, he sat at the kitchen table wearing reading glasses he hated admitting he needed. Pencil tucked behind one ear. Laptop open beside a plate of untouched eggs. The room smelled faintly like pipe cement from tools drying near the door. He refreshed the SSA estimate again. Higher. Again. Small increases, but steady. Some years barely moved the estimate at all. Others mattered more. He leaned back slowly, looking almost suspicious of the improvement. Then he said something.
Later repeated to me word for word.
It finally stopped feeling like everything was hanging by a thread.
That sentence stayed with me, because underneath all the policy talk and earnings records and calculations, that's really what many people are carrying around. Fear. Quiet fear. Fear of becoming dependent. Fear of running out of money. Fear of becoming the person everybody has to rescue. Especially men like Eddie, who built their entire identity around being useful. By the time winter rolled around, his routine had changed completely from the man sitting panicked on the bumper of that work van months earlier. He still worked hard, still came home sore, still muttered curses when his laptop froze. But there was structure now. Invoices organized in folders instead of tossed across the passenger seat. Taxes planned for instead of feared. Steadier contracts replacing random emergency chaos. Most importantly, he had a target. 70. Not just surviving until 70. Building toward it. One cold morning, he sat alone at the kitchen table before sunrise, while Diane slept down the hall. Only the stove light on. Coffee steaming beside the keyboard. He opened the SSA page one more time, studied the estimate carefully, then closed the laptop gently. Didn't recalculate, didn't panic check another scenario. Just sat there quietly with both hands wrapped around the mug. He told me later that was the first morning he finally believed the future might hold together. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough that he could stop waking up terrified. Enough that he no longer felt ashamed looking at his own life. The funny thing is, Eddie never described himself as successful afterward. That wasn't his personality. He just said he'd finally fixed the most important leak he ever ignored. And somehow that sounded more honest than any polished ending I could invent. I wish I could tell you this always ends well, but that wouldn't be honest. What I can tell you is this. The people who improve these situations usually do one hard thing first. They stop looking away. And Eddie Sullivan finally stopped looking away.
I spent half my life thinking being tough meant handling everything alone. Turns out being honest with myself was harder than crawling under any damn house I ever worked on.
This story shows how steady reported income helped Eddie Sullivan get out from under weak and missing earnings years and strengthen his Social Security benefits. I keep thinking about that kitchen table in Atlanta, the buzzing overhead light, the smell of coffee and pipe glue, those crumpled earnings, printouts spread beside rusted tools, while Eddie slowly rebuilt a future he almost ignored into the ground. And what matters to me most is that he wasn't some financial expert. He was a tired plumber with aching knees who finally decided to treat his own future like a repair job worth showing up for. Here's what I've learned after all these years. People who work with their hands often trust movement more than paperwork. They'll crawl through mud at midnight for somebody else's emergency, but freeze when it's time to look at their own earnings record. The biggest thing I want you to take away from Eddie's story is this. Avoidance feels temporary while you're doing it. Then one morning, you realize 10 or 15 years disappeared. I've sat across enough kitchen tables to know shame makes people delay things that could still be improved. And I've also seen something else. Once somebody finally faces the numbers honestly, the fear usually becomes more manageable than the imagination was. Eddie stopped trying to outrun the problem and started approaching it like a clogged system, one weak section at a time. That mindset changed everything. And notice something important. He didn't fix this through magic. No miracle investment. No secret loophole, just steadier, documented earnings, consistency, and enough humility to admit the old approach wasn't working anymore. Here are a few things you can do this week, if Eddie's story felt familiar. 1. Pick one quiet hour this week and sit at your kitchen table with your earnings record open in front of you. No television, no distractions. Treat it like Eddie treated those pipe diagrams, something real that deserves your full attention. 2. Look specifically for low-income or zero-income years. Circle them physically on paper if you have to. Eddie understood his situation better once he could literally see the weak spots sitting in front of him. 3. If your work has been inconsistent or partly cash-based, start building steadier documented income now instead of later. Even a few stronger years near retirement can matter more than people realize. 4. Create one repeatable weekly ritual around this. Eddie had his early morning kitchen table routine with coffee, invoices, and his laptop. Your ritual matters because routines keep panic from taking over. 5. Stop treating taxes and reporting like future problems. Eddie's turnaround accelerated once he stopped improvising every April and started organizing records year-round. 6. If your body is already showing wear, be honest about it now. Don't assume you can work endlessly through pain. Eddie changed course partly because he realized his back and hands were already warning him. 7. And this one matters most. Talk to somebody you trust before the fear grows in silence. Pride isolates people. Isolation usually makes financial problems worse. If you're somewhere between 45 and 65, and this story hit close to home, drop "I'm in" the comments. I read them, and I try to answer as many as I can. We can figure out your situation together. This is the story of one ordinary person who figured out their situation. This is not personal advice, and not a guarantee. Social Security rules are complex and depend on your age, earnings record, credits, health, family situation, and possible changes in law. What worked here will not work for everyone. Always consult a qualified Social Security professional or your local office before making any decisions. Don't risk your family's future relying solely on someone else's experience. This video contains a dramatized educational story inspired by common Social Security situations. Some names, characters, and situations may be composite or fictionalized for educational storytelling purposes.